The buzz on the spin. The door opens and a swarm of Charbis rush in. They're speaking quickly in a language that Wu does not understand, but the tone is all over the place. Something wrong? Observer Wu asks and gets roughly 20 sets of eyes glaring at him. Family affairs in the hive. Excuse me, I need to be there for this. Hoagie says, rising up. Is it time? Janet asks breathlessly. It is. Hoagie replies and she lets out a beaming smile. Janet then rushes into the back and asks the women there to hold down the shop for a time and then rushes out with everyone else. Well, that's probably important. One of Wu's bodyguards states out loud as he watches the crowd disappear. No doubt. Observer Wu states before leaning to the side and raising his eyebrows. The area is suspiciously empty of bee women. What? The Charbis are downright omnipresent in Sector 4. Usually. The snicked woman at the bar notes as she hops off her stool and opens the door. She glances around and shrugs. Not a one in sight. It's another weird time. So this has happened before? Yes, but more often recently. Since Mr. Eastman arrived on the station? Oh. Some eggs must be hatching. No wonder all the Charbis are gone. The hives are all related, so if it's not their own daughters then it's their nieces or granddaughters being born. The snicked exclaims. That would do it. I suppose there's nothing to do but wait so we can finish things. Observer Wu notes. At least the chairs are comfortable, sir. One of his guards notes. His leap takes him over a trap and a twist in the air has him avoid a nearly invisible wire. The triggering mechanisms of the traps are mechanical and not axiom-based, so while the payload can be easily spotted, they're distracting from the triggering mechanisms. Usually thin threads that are easily snapped. But he has to angle his landing and use his fingers to avoid setting off a few pressure plates and axiom energy starts moving and he starts moving too. Then he sees it. Tiny lenses. There must have been a laser in a spectrum he can't see in. He broke the beam. A tripwire finer than even the dental floss he's avoiding or the spider silk they're distracting from. The payload is a massive mount of goop and he goes UP as it triggers the other traps in a dominoes effect. Had he stayed on the ground he'd be a flash-worked statue in every neon color, glitter-covered and with numerous pictures snapped of it. He catches the next level of trap between his feet and bends backwards hard to dodge the continuation of things. He pulls himself up and starts to climb in a dizzying spiral to avoid getting tagged. None of the traps are lethal and none of them are designed in malice, which is screwing with the battle instinct he had pounded into him. He reaches the top and leaps to the side with his arms and legs like an animal and then rolls before sliding into a ditch and shooting down it and then leaping out before the entire thing fills with bright pink paint and then flips through the air and lands with his heels together. You know you could have just knocked on the front door. Isma chides him. Well, where's the fun in that? Harold asks and she scoffs. It's good to see you again, little man. I see you've had a time of it. Lost a lot of weight. Yeah. Turns out I was developmentally accelerated rather than printed off at an adult stage. Meaning I needed to swap my parts out or rot. He notes. Not a weight loss program I would recommend. Isma notes. Why would the women of the galaxy need a weight loss program? Does it not all go to the breasts and rear? It does, and when a woman can't get through a door or fit in normal clothing she has a problem. Isma notes. A strange little gap in your knowledge. I run in strange circles. How was the rest of your hunting trip? It was mostly over by that point, although Gazelle coming out of her shell was a wonderful thing to happen. Where is she? The next sector over, she's getting mass-produced explosives. I may have to poke my nose in on that. Harold notes. Oh, she's fine, we've already bothered some of the local undaunted into poking their own noses in. Oh, fair enough. So, care to hear about what I've been up to? I'd love to. Isma says. But first, I'd like you to meet someone. Technically two someones, but one hasn't hatched yet. You just embody the term mother, don't you? Harold asks as he follows Isma into a secluded area. This whole section of the deck was like living in an underground forest. lush with life, but enclosed and very, very dark. Of course, I was a fairly rabid gravid when I was really young. It wasn't until one of my sons refused to speak to me that I eased up on it. It's a standard I hold myself to, that's where faith is best. When it's something you hold to yourself and don't force on others. Did you? He was taken from me forever before I could reconnect. Isma admits and pauses. I'm sorry. Thank you, but there's nothing you could have done. It happened thousands of years ago. It still isn't something unworthy of pity or sympathy. Perhaps. As terrible as it was, it did make me a better mother. I just wish it didn't take tragedy at that scale to slap the folly out of me. She says to herself. Still, regrets are for quiet moments of contemplation. And certainly not when there are guests and friends about. Now, it's time for you to meet one of Yoru brothers. So you did adopt one? I did. This little big man was one of the physically oldest before being de-aged and his growth halted. But shish. It's nappy time. She says, and he nods before she gently opens what appears to be a doorway between a gnarled tree and a cave wall. The woman's home really does resemble something out of an old fairy tale. She creeps in as quiet as a shadow. Harold makes a point of only being half so loud as he follows. The room has a soft green glow from phosphorescent mushrooms, and in the center is a crib and an incubator with a large leathery egg inside. The mild humming of the machine is only slightly drowned out by the snoring baby boy. His cherubic cheeks and softly curling hair adds to the impression of utter innocence. He looks photo-ready, even down to the tiny tongue sticking out of his mouth ever so. Yes, that's a Jameson all right. Kidnap bait before he even reaches the age of a kid. Must have been a challenge getting the little guy used to you at first. Harold whispers. It was worth it. Isma answers just as softly as she bends down and kisses the little boy on the brow. And who's the father of this one? He asks, gesturing to the egg she laid. Horace Blue, it was a legal purchase. Well, damn. If you're trying to get the most complicated family not possible, you're doing a he. He looks down and decides against swearing. A heck of a job. Oh, there is better, and more amusing in royal lines. If you really want to see a few mind twisters, look to the older royal families and wait till you see the loops in the line. Loops in the line? It's the polite way to say, marrying an ancestor. She says, and his jaw drops. Of course, by the time that's normally allowed, enough generations have passed that they're genetically distant enough for the risk to be low. But it's always a mind bender when it happens. Holy crow. That's incredibly insane. Harold notes before thinking. What's the craziest you've ever witnessed? A royal husband having his great-great-granddaughter having to share the bed with her great-great-granddaughter and her great-great-granddaughter. I'm a little terrified to ask how the children turned out. No one knows. The family was overthrown and put to the blade not long after. She says, and he stares. I wasn't involved, but I was watching with interest from the sidelines. Hun. Just the amount of history you must have seen is. I often find myself in the middle of some pretty crazy things. I'm just there, happily hunting and spending time with my little babies. And then there's some huge heavy drama the next forest glade over, and there's talk of coups, royal succession, death and murder, and by the time I get all my children back and a good seat to watch the silliness, it's usually over except the cleanup. Things happen fast when they get to the knife part of politics. I'd imagine so. It usually works that way for Herbert as well. Everything calm, business as usual, then someone has something sharp or explosive make its appearance and the excitement is over and done within 10 or so minutes, but the cleanup can take 10 months. That's politics, boring until it's not. That's a lot of things actually. Isma says with a smile. Unless you learn to love the wait. If you develop an appreciation for peeping or spying on people, then spy work is, surprise surprise, quite fun. Harold says, and Isma giggles. True enough. She says before gesturing for them both to leave the room. Does Horace know? Herbert asks. I did send him a message. But beyond that, he's likely to have little influence in the child's life. Although from what I can tell, it's a human girl. Isma says with a smile. Oh, hun. Right. That funny quirk of the family. Funny indeed. Isma says with a smile. Now let's get back to where my girls are entertaining your wives so I can tell them about all the little mistakes you made. What? You were so busy dodging the traps you ignored the cameras. The point wasn't the cameras, the point was the traps. He protests. Actually, it's security, so the traps weren't the point. It was the cameras. Don't do word games with me, I got through clean. Right in front of me, you don't think that's a penalty? No. Herbert insists. Let's see what they have to say. Isma challenges. Yes, let's. Janet comes back almost skipping and with a big smile on her face. Everything turn out well? Observer Wu asks, he's halfway through a breakfast special with orange juice that's so well done that when his eyes are closed he can fool himself into thinking he's back on Earth. Oh yes, it was wonderful. She answers. So what was it? Are you allowed to say? I'm afraid not, however it's just good news all around. Janet says, bustling around. And don't worry about your tab. The day is wonderful enough to not worry about it. Considering that your son is the hive husband of one of the major food producers, I'd say that it's not much of a ding on your finances either way. Observer Wu says, and she nods. So what are they naming the new grandbabies? Any of them a Janet? There's already a. Janet pauses and gives him an even look. That wasn't fair. No, and I apologize for that. You're going to be paying your tab proper now. Worth it. Observer Wu says, and she sighs. You know, sometimes it's an absolute frustration to deal with a smarter, more observant man. Janet says, and Observer Wu smirks as he takes a sip of his orange juice. You still need the rest of the story, don't you? I do. We had a ship full of refugees from a species that he hadn't met before, a fleet of mercenaries that would drag them back into slavery, 2 adepts brawling, a ship captain being a fool, and then. What? Well, next he had a quick meal here with me and his wives. It's quite a thing to have an entire swarm of bee women working the kitchen and bringing in food for it all. Still, if someone wants to cook for me, then I'm happy to have some. Even if they do like their sugar too much and don't add enough butter or salt to anything.